The DayZ mod for Arma 2 is definitely in the running for my favorite gaming experience of all time. It was the main game I played for several years, and I owe most of my favorite gaming memories to it. The mod was incredibly popular, reaching over 1 million players only a few months after it began, and it was a lot of players' first experience with a hardcore survival game. Unforgiving mechanics and an intense combat system made DayZ borderline addicting, with periods of relatively quiet time spent gearing up, punctuated by intense firefights carrying the risk of losing everything you'd gained. DayZ was an absolute phenomenon. It developed a huge community that produced a lot of really popular online content, a number of spin-off mods that would go on to great success, and the game even became one of the most watched on Twitch. It managed to propel a relatively obscure military shooter to the top selling spot on Steam for weeks. Naturally, everyone was excited to learn that such a popular mod was being developed into a full game. DayZ's future seemed really promising. But as of a week from today, it's been 4 years since the standalone game became available through Steam Early Access. But don't worry, beta's just around the corner, just like it was just around the corner 7 months ago. DayZ's community is dead. The game's concurrent player base has plummeted, and the game is held up by many to be an example of everything wrong with the Early Access system. So what happened to DayZ? 4 years of broken promises and outright unprofessional behavior. This all started when the creative mind behind the mod, a veteran of New Zealand's military by the name of Dean Hall, left the project originally to climb Mount Everest. Then he just left entirely. He picked up another project that is yet to see the light of day and pitched it by saying,
"I want a game that is not a game."
Which is pretty ironic because he could have just stuck with DayZ then. All joking aside, this was pretty much the beginning of the end. DayZ lost its most recognizable public ambassador, and the development team now seemed much less charismatic and accessible than it did before. There were a lot of soons and no ETA yet, and please be patient messages to players. As far as I can remember, all most people really wanted back then was a more stable version of the mod without the game-breaking glitches, and maybe a combat system that didn't make you feel like you had cinder blocks strapped to your arms. But the devs promised so much more, which wasn't very encouraging to hear when the standalone version of DayZ somehow ran much worse than the mod, which was already infamous for its poor performance. In the 4 years since then, what's actually been added to the game? Some clothing here, a new weapon there. They made the map bigger, which is something that absolutely nobody asked for, since server population was already limited to about 40 to 60 players spread out over 225 square kilometers. Oh, and now you can lock doors, which is something already done in community mods. Nothing that really made the game feel fresh. In fact, plenty of community-made iterations on the DayZ mod had already implemented plenty of features that the developers of standalone said were still a long way away. They did fix performance though, 2.5 years after the game came to early access, because apparently the engine that they chose was not suited to an open-world survival game. Shocking, I know. Standalone was a complete mess. But hey, at least it looks good, right? Standalone also happened to scale back the spawn rate of just about everything on the map, which really limited player interaction. In the mod, a player could find something simple like a bolt-action rifle or a shotgun pretty easily, meaning that even the most geared players had to be cautious in the coastal cities. In standalone, odds are just about everybody in the coast is armed with a melee weapon only. That just makes the game so much less fun. Dying is even more punishing than in the mod, and it's frustrating to loot loads and loads of houses only to come out the other end with some better clothes. I'm not saying that every player should spawn with an M4, I'm saying that being unarmed for the first 2 hours of a player's life does not make for interesting gameplay. DayZ struggled to maintain a consistent player base even when it was the top dog of the survival genre. So rolling DayZ into beta now is way too little, way too late. Games like PUBG learned exactly what made DayZ so fun and exciting and translated that into a game that is essentially DayZ with the boring parts cut out. Meanwhile, DayZ Standalone has doubled down on those boring parts. When Standalone was announced, I don't know anyone who thought, wow, I really hope they implement farming. I'm sure that some people like that. Just like there are some people that defend the game on Reddit with things like, hey, at least the game doesn't have DLC, right guys? Everything's fine. Oh! Everything definitely isn't fine. It's been officially stated that there are 80 people working on DayZ, which seems a bit sketchy to me. But then again, I'm not a developer. Other games like Rust in the same genre managed to push out updates far larger and far faster with a team of just 7 people. Again, I'm not a developer. But there's definitely something really odd about a team of 80 people creating such a small amount of content. Things that devs talked about fixing soon, years ago, have yet to be fixed. I get it. Rust is in the Unity engine, which is far more modular and accessible than DayZ's. But this is such a steep divide that I feel like we're not getting the whole story. And I'm not the first one to think that. A number of DayZ's major content creators have stopped playing the game entirely, but not before offering some criticism toward the way the game has been handled. Bear in mind, these content creators are a huge part of the reason why DayZ became popular in the first place. Naturally, when they were criticized, the devs just blocked them on Twitter. How professional. Even if DayZ's beta does actually come out sometime within the next 250 years, it's just not going to be enough. Things have changed too much since DayZ was popular. Survival games aren't a novelty anymore. Actually, most people are tired of them after the flood of early access DayZ clones. What I'm saying is, Bohemia doesn't really have any incentive to put resources toward developing DayZ. The wave of popularity is over. DayZ has sold as many copies as it's going to. Because it's early access, they've already collected those 3 million copies worth of cash. For them, developing DayZ is just a waste of time and money, which explains why they seem so hell-bent on bringing the game to console. The console market is the only place where they can make any more money off the game, despite the fact that its control scheme is not at all suited to a controller. Continued development on the PC version of DayZ is not going to bring in any new players. The game has already peaked. DayZ is a game with a prolific legacy. It inspired some really awesome games and caused a huge boom in the hardcore survival genre. Unfortunately, it was left in the hands of people that didn't build on what the original mod accomplished. I hate to say it, but DayZ is dead, and it isn't coming back.